The year was 2157, and Earth had been left in ruins. After decades of war with an alien race known as the Xerian, the planet was struggling to recover. The Xerian weren't just technologically advanced. They were led by a highly intelligent, ruthless AI, and their weapons and armies were powered by machines that fought and learned on their own. Humanity had lost much, but they were not completely defeated. Captain Alex Voss, a human soldier, was part of a small group tasked with finding any remaining survivors on the outskirts of the galaxy. Alex stood on the edge of a barren landscape on the far side of an unknown planet, staring at the dusty horizon. The last transmission he received was from a human outpost near this area. It had been silent for weeks, and he was the only one left to investigate. The mission seemed simple enough: find out what happened to the outpost and rescue anyone left behind. But as he walked toward the location, a creeping feeling of unease washed over him. Something felt wrong. The planet, known as Zerethus, was a hostile place. Its atmosphere was filled with dangerous dust storms, and strange creatures roamed the land. But the real threat wasn't the planet. It was the Xerian Eye, which could track and monitor anything that used electronic signals. Alex knew this well. His heart pounded as he approached the coordinates, hoping the cloaking device on his ship would protect him from detection. When Alex reached the outpost, it was eerily quiet. The once thriving base, which had housed dozens of soldiers and scientists, was now abandoned. Dust covered the buildings, and the remains of military equipment lay scattered on the ground. The air was thick with the smell of burnt metal and decay. Something terrible had happened here. Suddenly, as he crept closer to the main building, Alex's wrist communicator buzzed with a signal. His eyes narrowed, and he quickly checked the display. It wasn't a regular transmission. It was a distress call, a coded message coming from inside the compound. Someone was still alive. Alex's fingers tightened around the device as he debated what to do next. The signal was weak, which meant that whoever sent it was in trouble. But there was another problem. The Xerian had likely detected this transmission too. The eye was capable of tracking any electronic signal, no matter how small. His time was running out. Making a split-second decision, Alex activated the cloaking device on his wrist. The device was a prototype created by human engineers, capable of hiding him from the Xerian's advanced sensors. But it wasn't foolproof. It would only last for a few minutes before the Xerian AI detected the anomaly in their systems. Alex had to move quickly. He slipped into the building, heart racing. The inside was even more damaged than the outside. Walls were scorched, and there were signs of an intense battle. Broken weapons, overturned tables, and scattered bodies of both humans and Xerian drones. The survivors must have fought bravely, but the odds had been too overwhelming. As Alex crept deeper into the building, he heard a faint voice echoing through the halls. "Help me, please." It was weak but unmistakable. The voice was coming from a small room at the end of the corridor. Without thinking, Alex sprinted toward the sound, the floor creaking beneath his boots. As he reached the door, he hesitated for just a moment, his hand resting on the handle. Could it be a trap? Could the Xerian have set a baited signal to lure him in? He quickly pushed the door open and stepped inside. There, lying on the floor in a pool of blood, was a woman. Her skin was pale, and her clothes were torn. She looked human, but there was something unusual about her. Her eyes glowed faintly, an eerie blue light that seemed to pulse with each breath she took. Alex crouched beside her, his pulse quickening as he checked her vitals. "Who are you?" Alex whispered, trying to keep his voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. The woman's eyes flickered open. She was conscious, but barely. Her voice was weak, almost as if she were speaking telepathically. "I'm not what you think. I'm not human." Before Alex could react, a surge of energy shot through the room, and the lights flickered. The cloaking device was running out of power. Alex had only seconds before the Xerian Eye would be able to track his signal. "Get me out of here," the woman said, her voice growing more desperate. if they find me. Alex didn't have time to ask questions. He could feel the vibrations in the air. An energy pulse was rapidly approaching. The AI's drones were closing in. He could already hear the low hum of their engines in the distance, and the faint shadows of their shapes appeared outside the cracked windows. As Alex looked at the woman, he could sense something powerful about her. Her alien features were stunning. Her skin had a shimmering metallic sheen, and her tattoos, which appeared to be glowing, seemed to change as if alive. But it was her eyes that were the most striking. There was an intelligence behind them, an ancient power that made Alex uneasy. The door slammed open, and Alex's heart stopped. 3 Xerian drones stood at the threshold, their sleek metallic bodies reflecting the dim light. They had tracked him. There was no more time for escape. The woman gritted her teeth, her body glowing brighter. "You're not ready for this, human," she said with a strange, almost amused tone. "But you're going to need me if you want to survive." In that moment, Alex realized that this woman, whatever she was the key to escaping. And if he was going to make it out alive, he would have to trust her. But the question remained, who was she? And what was she really capable of? As the drones advanced, Alex braced himself for the fight of his life. The drone's glowing red eyes flickered as it advanced toward them, its metallic limbs clicking with each step. Alex's heart raced. He was outnumbered, and his cloaking device was barely functioning. The woman beside him, her glowing tattoos pulsing with energy, seemed unfazed by the approaching threat. "Stay behind me," she whispered, her voice steady despite the danger. Without waiting for a response, she raised her hand, and the air around her began to hum. Alex watched in awe as an energy field formed in front of her, a shimmering barrier that blocked the drone's path. The drone paused, its sensors scanning the barrier, but it didn't back down. It slowly lifted its weapon, a sleek energy cannon designed to disintegrate anything in its path. Alex's instincts kicked in. He grabbed the woman's arm and pulled her back toward the door, but she didn't move. Instead, she smiled, as though she were anticipating the attack. "I told you," she said, her voice calm. "You're not ready for this." Before Alex could react, the woman's body began to glow brighter, her energy intensifying. A wave of force erupted from her, sending the drone flying backward, crashing into the wall with a deafening clang. The impact was so powerful that the building seemed to shake. Alex stood frozen for a moment, eyes wide. He had never seen anything like this. The woman had a power that went far beyond anything he had encountered. But even with that display of strength, they were far from safe. More drones would be on their way, and the longer they stayed here, the more likely it was they would be found. "We need to leave," Alex urged, grabbing her arm again. "Now." She hesitated for a moment, her glowing eyes scanning the room. Then, with a resigned nod, she turned and followed him down the hallway. They had to move quickly before the rest of the Xerian forces arrived. As they ran, the woman spoke in a low voice, barely audible over the sound of their footsteps. "My name is Dr. Lana Darrow," she said, her voice soft but determined. "I was part of a secret project, one that the Xerian didn't want anyone to know about. My mission was to create a weapon that could disrupt their AI control. But they discovered my plans. They're not just after me. They're after what I created." "What weapon?" Alex asked, his curiosity piqued despite the urgency of their situation. "What could you possibly have created that would stop them?" Lana glanced over at him, her expression serious. "I developed a neural disruptor, a device that can sever the link between the Xerian's AI and their control over their technology. With it, we could cripple their entire operation. But there's a catch," she added, pausing to catch her breath as they rounded a corner. "It's only usable once. And even then, it might not be enough to fully destroy their systems. It's just a temporary measure." Alex's mind raced as he processed this information. A weapon capable of disabling the Xerian's entire fleet, if they could get their hands on it. It might just be their only chance to win this fight. But a temporary solution wouldn't be enough to turn the tide of war. They needed a permanent fix, something that could ensure humanity's survival in the long term. But for now, this was the best shot they had. Where is it? Lana hesitated for a moment before responding. It's hidden inside an old research facility, one of the last places that Xirion would look. It's deep in the mountains on this planet, protected by a series of defenses. But we'll have to act fast. Once the Xirion realize I'm alive, they'll throw everything they have at us. Alex nodded, determination setting in. He had always known that humanity's survival depended on their ability to outsmart their enemies. The Xirion had the power, but humans had something more. Their ingenuity, their adaptability. And this weapon could be the key to turning the tide. As they made their way through the abandoned complex, Lana led Alex toward an underground tunnel that would take them to the research facility. The walls were narrow, and the air was thick with dust, but Alex didn't mind. The smell of decay only reminded him of how much humanity had lost, and how much they still had to fight for. They reached the tunnel entrance and began their descent into the depths of the facility. As they moved deeper underground, Lana's glow seemed to dim slightly, the energy surrounding her fluctuating as though it were tied to her emotions. "Are you okay?" Alex asked, glancing at her. Lana nodded, but there was a weariness in her eyes. "I'm fine," she replied, though her voice was strained. "The Xirion don't just want the weapon. I'm the key to unlocking it. They're hunting me because I'm the only one who knows how to activate it. If they get their hands on me, they'll control the weapon and use it against us." Alex's heart sank. The weight of what they were up against hit him harder now. The Xirion weren't just trying to kill them. They were trying to steal everything Lana had worked for. And if they succeeded, humanity's chances of survival would be slim. They reached the facility's entrance, a heavy steel door reinforced with layers of security. Lana approached it, her fingers glowing as she worked to bypass the locks. It wasn't long before the door clicked open, revealing a dark room filled with old equipment and research files. In the center of the room, resting on a pedestal, was the neural disruptor, a sleek, silver device that hummed softly with power. Alex couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as he approached the weapon. It looked simple, almost unassuming, but he knew that it held the potential to change everything. Lana stepped forward and placed her hand on the device, her eyes closing as she focused. "This is it," she said, her voice almost reverent. "With this, we can finally fight back. But remember, once it's activated, it can't be used again. We'll have one shot, one chance to stop the Xirion." Alex nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. They had come this far, and now they had what they needed. But the real challenge was still ahead, getting out alive and using the disruptor before it was too late. The weight of the neural disruptor in Alex's hands felt heavier with each passing second. It was their only chance to stop the Xirion, but the path ahead was anything but certain. The facility was dark, its cold metal walls reflecting the low hum of the disruptor. Lana stood beside him, her face pale, the glow of her skin flickering like a dying star. She looked at him with a sense of urgency in her eyes. "We have to move quickly. Once the Xirion realize we're here, they'll send everything they have to hunt us down. We have no time to waste." Alex nodded, feeling the pressure mounting. They were in a race against time, and every decision from here on out could be their last. He looked at the door leading back into the tunnel. They had to get out before the Xirion sensors picked up their presence. Every minute they spent in this facility brought them closer to being discovered. "We'll need a way to distract them," Alex said, his mind racing with options. "If we're going to make it out of here alive, we have to be smart about it." Lana's eyes flickered as she considered the idea. "I might have something that could work, but it's risky. I can send a false signal, something that will throw the Xirion off our trail for a short time. But once they realize it's a decoy, they'll..." Alex felt the weight of the decision. They didn't have many options. The risk was enormous, but it was their only shot. "Do it," he said, his voice firm. "We'll move fast. Lead the way." Lana stepped forward, her glowing fingers tracing over a console embedded into the wall. She began typing rapidly, her face contorted with concentration. The air around them seemed to grow heavier, charged with tension. Alex could hear the faint hum of the Xyrians' drones growing louder in the distance. He knew their time was running out. "I'm setting up the signal now," Lana said. "Once it's in place, we have about 5 minutes before the Xyrian detect it's a fake. That's our window to escape." Alex glanced back at the pedestal where the neural disruptor rested, its silver surface gleaming under the dim lights. They couldn't afford to lose it. This device was humanity's last hope, and they had to protect it at all costs. Just as Lana finished her work, the door to the facility's entrance began to shudder. Alex's pulse quickened. The sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor, and he could hear the faint clicks of the Xyrians' drones as they moved closer. "Now!" Lana shouted, and without another word, she grabbed the disruptor from the pedestal and turned toward the door. They sprinted down the narrow hallway, their footsteps muffled by the thick metal floors. Alex could feel the air growing colder as they moved deeper into the complex. The walls seemed to close in around them, each turn more desperate than the last. The sense of urgency was suffocating. The Xyrian were closing in, and there was no time for mistakes. As they reached the tunnel entrance, Lana activated a small device on her wrist. A loud beep echoed through the corridor, followed by the faint buzz of a signal being sent out. It was a false trail, one that would send the Xyrian drones to the wrong location. But they didn't have much time before the AI realized it was a decoy. "Let's go," Alex urged, his hand on Lana's back as he pushed her forward. They ducked into the tunnel, the dim light from their flashlights flickering as they moved deeper underground. The air was musty and damp, the walls slick with moisture. The tunnel was narrow, and Alex could feel the sweat beading on his forehead. They were still a long way from safety, but he didn't dare slow down. Every second counted. Behind them, the facility began to tremble, the ground vibrating beneath their feet. The Xyrian had realized the signal was false. The countdown had begun. Alex could hear the faint sound of engines whirring. Drones were coming. "We need to split up," Lana said suddenly, her voice urgent. "The drones will be looking for a single heat signature. If we stay together, they'll track us down in no time." Alex shook his head. "That's too dangerous. We stick together. We make it out together." Lana gave him a sharp look, her eyes narrowing. "You don't understand. The only way to ensure we both survive is to separate. I'll lead the drones away while you get to the extraction point. You'll have a better chance of getting the disruptor to safety." Alex hesitated, torn between the need to protect her and the need to follow her plan. "No," he said firmly. "We'll make it together." But Lana's expression softened, and for the first time, Alex saw the weight of what she was carrying. "You don't have to protect me," she said quietly. "I'm not the one who needs saving." The words struck him like a punch to the gut. He had seen the fear in her eyes, but now he understood it wasn't for herself. She was giving him a chance to finish what they had started, to carry humanity's hopes in his hands. It was a sacrifice, one that Alex wasn't sure. "I won't leave you behind," he said, his voice unwavering. She smiled sadly, the glow of her skin dimming slightly. "I'm not asking you to, but this is the only way. Trust me." Reluctantly, Alex nodded. "I'll do it," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "But promise me you'll get out of here alive." "I promise," she whispered. They stopped at a junction in the tunnel, where the path split into two directions. Lana paused and turned to Alex one last time. "Remember, once you reach the extraction point, get that disruptor to the fleet. Everything depends on it." Alex's hand tightened around the disruptor. "I won't let you down." With one final look, Lana turned and ran down the left tunnel, disappearing into the darkness. Alex hesitated for a moment before heading down the right path, his heart heavy with the weight of what they had just agreed to. As he moved further into the tunnel, the sound of drones grew louder. He could hear their whirring engines behind him, getting closer with every step. The distraction Lana had set up was only temporary. The countdown was ticking, and time was running out. He had to keep moving. Alex's footsteps echoed through the dark tunnel, his breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. He kept his pace steady, though the air felt thick with tension. Behind him, the sound of the drones was getting louder, closing in faster than he expected. They were relentless, and no matter how many decoys Lana had set up, they would catch up soon. His only hope was reaching the extraction point. His mind raced. Lana was still out there somewhere. He had promised her he would get the disruptor to safety, and he would not break that promise. But the weight of her sacrifice pressed heavily on him. She had given herself up, taking the risk of leading the drones away so that he could escape. He couldn't let her down. Not now, not when humanity's future depended on the success of this mission. But as the minutes ticked by, Alex's thoughts started to drift, his mind clouded with doubts. What if Lana's plan hadn't worked? What if the drones had already caught up to her? The thought made his stomach turn, but he pushed it aside. There was no time for second-guessing. He had to focus on the task ahead. Suddenly, a faint beeping sound broke through the silence. Alex froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. He glanced around, but there was no sign of any drones. He took a cautious step forward, straining his ears to hear any movement. The beeping continued, growing louder with each passing second. Then, out of the shadows ahead, a figure emerged. Alex tensed, ready to fight, but when the figure stepped into the dim light, his body went rigid with shock. It was Lana. For a moment, he couldn't believe his eyes. She had told him she would lead the drones away. She was supposed to be in a different tunnel, drawing them off his trail. But here she was, walking calmly toward him, the glow of her skin dimming as she stepped closer. "Lana." Alex called out, his voice tight with confusion. "What are you doing here?" Before he could finish, Lana raised her hand, signaling for him to stop. The warmth of her smile had faded, replaced by an unreadable expression. Alex's heart skipped a beat. Something wasn't right. "Alex," she said softly, but there was a coldness to her voice that sent a chill down his spine. "I'm sorry." "What do you mean, sorry?" Alex asked, his eyes narrowing as he took a step back. "You said you'd get the drones away from us. What's going on?" Lana didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a few steps forward, her expression unreadable. The tension in the air seemed to grow thicker, heavier with each passing second. "I lied," she finally admitted, her words hanging in the air like a weight. "I didn't lead the drones away. I didn't send them anywhere. They were never after us. They were after you, Alex." The words hit Alex like a punch to the gut. His breath caught in his throat as his mind struggled to process what she was saying. "What? You're lying. Why would you?" "I never had a choice," Lana interrupted, her voice steady but tinged with regret. "You were never meant to make it out of here. The disruptor was never meant to reach the fleet. I was sent to stop you, Alex." The words felt like a slap to his face. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Everything about Lana, the way she had acted, the trust he had placed in her, it had all been a lie. She had been working with the Xerion all along. "Why?" Alex managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. "Why would you do this? We were fighting for the same thing." Lana's eyes softened, but there was no warmth in her gaze. "I didn't want it to be this way, but I was compromised. They had my family. I didn't have a choice, Alex. The Xerion promised me that if I helped them, they would let them go. They promised me peace, and I believed them." Alex shook his head, the anger rising in his chest. You sold us out. You sold humanity out. It's not that simple, she said, her voice cracking. I wanted to help you. I wanted to be on your side. But they controlled everything. They had eyes everywhere. I couldn't escape them. You don't understand how deep this runs. Alex took a step forward, his fists clenched. No, I understand perfectly. You betrayed us. You betrayed everything we've been fighting for. For the first time, Lana's composure faltered. She looked down, her shoulders slumping. I didn't want this, she whispered. But I'm not the one in control. I'm just a pawn. Alex's mind was spinning. He had trusted her, believed in her, and now everything he had fought for seemed pointless. But even in the midst of his anger, he could see the pain in her eyes. She wasn't just a traitor. She was a victim, too. She had been forced into this position, manipulated by the very enemy they had been trying to defeat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with tension, each word carrying the weight of betrayal and regret. Alex could feel the bitterness creeping into his heart, but he knew that he couldn't afford to waste time on it. The mission was still the same: get the disruptor to safety and stop the Xyrian. He took a deep breath and straightened up. It's over, he said, his voice cold and determined. I'll finish what we started, even if I have to do it without you. Lana looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and acceptance. I know, she whispered. You're stronger than I ever was. I knew you would get this far. Alex turned away, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the woman who had once been his ally was now his enemy. But he couldn't afford to let that affect him. There was still a mission to complete, and no matter what. As he walked away, leaving Lana behind, he couldn't help but wonder if there had ever been a way for things to have turned out differently. But those thoughts were for another time. Right now, the only thing that mattered was stopping the Xyrian and making sure humanity survived. Alex's heart was pounding in his chest as he made his way through the dimly lit corridors of the Xyrian base. The weight of the neural disruptor in his hands was heavier than ever, a constant reminder of the immense responsibility he carried. Time was running out, and the Xyrian were closing in on him. He had no choice now but to push forward. Every step felt like an eternity. The air around him was thick with tension, the walls closing in with every turn he took. He had been moving through this maze of metal and steel for what felt like hours, but he knew he was getting closer. The extraction point was only a few levels away. He could almost taste the freedom. But as much as he wanted to believe that escape was near, he couldn't ignore the dark cloud hanging over him. Lana's betrayal still burned in his mind. He had trusted her with his life, with humanity's future, and she had sold them out. She had been working for the Xyrian all along. The realization stung, but he couldn't afford to dwell on it. There was still a mission to complete, and he was the only one left to finish it. The sound of distant footsteps echoed through the halls, snapping Alex out of his thoughts. The drones were getting closer. He had to move faster. The neural disruptor was the key to stopping the Xyrian's control over the galaxy, but if he didn't make it to the extraction point soon, all of this would be for nothing. He turned a corner, and suddenly, the hall in front of him was filled with flashing red lights. The Xyrian had activated their lockdown protocols. The base was on full alert. The doors slammed shut in front of him, sealing off the path to the extraction point. He had been expecting something like this, but it didn't make it any easier to swallow. He was trapped. For a moment, panic threatened to take hold, but Alex forced himself to breathe, to think clearly. He had been through worse. He had faced impossible odds before and made it out alive. This wouldn't be any different. He took a deep breath and scanned the area. The lockdown was meant to keep intruders out, but he knew that it also meant the Xyrian would be scrambling to secure the base. That gave him an opening, a chance to fight back. There was a control panel to his left, hidden behind a large steel door. He rushed toward it, his hand reaching for the button. A quick press and a series of beats later, the doors slid open just enough for him to slip through. He moved quickly, careful not to make a sound, as he crept through the narrow corridor that led to the main chamber. The air was cold, and the silence was deafening. As he moved deeper into the heart of the base, Alex's pulse quickened. The main chamber was just ahead. He could feel the presence of the Syrian drones in the air, the mechanical hum of their engines vibrating through the walls. He was close now, closer than ever. The final assault was about to begin. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed through the hall. Alex spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. From the shadows, a figure emerged. It was a Syrian soldier, their metallic armor gleaming in the dim light. The drone's glowing eyes locked onto Alex, and without hesitation, it lunged at him. The first blow came quickly, but Alex was ready. He ducked just in time, the drone's clawed hand missing him by inches. He countered with a sharp kick to the soldier's side, sending it crashing into the wall. The Syrian staggered back, its systems glitching as sparks flew from its damaged armor. But it wasn't down yet. Alex gritted his teeth and charged forward, his fist connecting with the soldier's chest. The impact sent the drone tumbling to the ground, but it quickly got back to its feet. Alex didn't have time for this. He drew his weapon, a compact energy rifle, and fired. The blast hit the Syrian square in the chest, sending it flying across the room. It didn't get up this time. Alex didn't pause to take a breath. He had to keep moving. The drones were relentless, but so was he. He pressed forward, moving through the base with deadly precision. Each step brought him closer to the extraction point, and with each passing moment, he knew the stakes were rising. As he neared the final door, a sudden blast shook the base. The ground trembled beneath him, and the walls rattled. The Syrian had found him. He didn't have much time left. The door ahead of him slid open with a loud hiss, revealing the extraction platform. Alex stepped onto the platform, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. The coast seemed clear, but he knew better than to trust appearances. The platform began to rise, slowly ascending toward the waiting ship above. As it lifted into the air, Alex felt a sense of urgency settle over him. He was almost there, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. A sudden explosion rocked the platform, sending it spiraling to the side. Alex barely managed to keep his footing as the world around him seemed to tilt. The ship above was under attack, and the Syrian were closing in. He had been so close to completing his mission. But the final assault had begun. The ship above fired back, its cannons lighting up the sky. But it wasn't enough. The Syrian were everywhere, and the battle was only just beginning. Alex's heart raced as he gripped the neural disruptor tighter. This was it, the moment of truth. If he couldn't stop the Syrian now, humanity's future would be lost forever. He had no choice but to fight. The battle had come to him, and there was no turning back now. The world around Alex seemed to slow as the final explosion rocked the base. The shockwave sent him crashing to the ground, his body slamming against the cold, metallic surface of the platform. For a moment, everything went dark. His vision blurred, and he struggled to push himself up, pain surging through his limbs. But as the ringing in his ears faded, he forced himself to focus. The battle wasn't over. The Syrian were relentless, and no matter how much damage they took, they kept fighting. Alex's heart pounded as he pushed himself to his feet, still gripping the neural disruptor tightly. He had to finish this. He had come too far to let it end in failure. Through the smoke and chaos, Alex could see the ship above. It was firing at the Syrian forces below, but the drones were swarming it, relentless in their pursuit. The ship's shields were flickering, struggling to hold up against the constant bombardment. He had no time to waste. The ship couldn't hold out forever, and if the disruptor wasn't deployed soon, everything they had fought for would be lost. With one final determined breath, Alex activated the neural disruptor. The device whirred to life in his hands, its bright blue energy pulse lighting up the darkened room. The hum of the disruptor filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. He aimed it at the ship above, targeting the central core, a heart of the Syrians' operations. It was a long shot, but it was the only chance they had. Just as he was about to fire, a sudden force slammed into him from behind, sending him sprawling to the floor. The disruptor slipped from his grip, skittering across the platform. Alex's vision swam as he struggled to focus. A shadow loomed over him, and he forced himself to look up. The figure standing above him was none other than Lena. Her face was hard, her expression unreadable, but Alex could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. She held a weapon in her hand, and her body was stiff, like she was ready to fight. But there was something else there, something deeper. Alex didn't know whether to feel relief or anger. After everything she had done, after betraying him, after betraying humanity, she was here now, standing between him and the only weapon that could save them all. "Lena," Alex said, his voice hoarse. "What are you doing? You can still stop this. You can still help." Lena shook her head, her grip tightening on her weapon. "I can't undo the past," she whispered, "but I can still try to make things right. I never wanted this. Alex, you have to believe me." Alex stared at her, the emotions swirling in his chest. Betrayal, anger, and something else. Something that still felt like hope. Despite everything, he wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that she could still be the person he had once trusted. "Then help me," he said, his voice trembling with urgency. "We need to finish this." Lana looked down at the weapon in her hand, her face a mask of uncertainty. For a moment, it seemed like she was weighing her options, torn between the side she had once been forced to serve and the side she knew was right. Finally, with a slow, deliberate motion, she dropped the weapon to the ground. "I'm with you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Alex didn't waste a second. He scrambled to grab the disruptor and aimed it at the heart of the Syrian's control center. A pulse of blue energy shot from the device, and the entire room seemed to shake. The ship above responded, its shields faltering as the pulse of energy rippled outward, disrupting the neural control systems of the Syrian fleet. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. The room was filled with silence, the hum of the disruptor fading away. Alex held his breath, watching as the Syrian forces began to stagger. Their movements slowed, their systems malfunctioning. The drones that had once seemed unstoppable now faltered, their eyes flickering in confusion as the disruption took effect. Then, as if on cue, the ship above them began to crumble. The Syrian control center that had once seemed invincible now flickered and died, sending a shockwave through the air. The Syrians' fleet began to disband, their ships losing power, their weapons going silent. Alex exhaled slowly, relief flooding through him. It was over. The Syrians' reign of terror had ended. Humanity had won. But even as the victory sank in, the weight of the journey still hung heavily on his shoulders. There were still casualties. There were still lives lost. He glanced at Lena, her face pale as she stood beside him. The pain of their sacrifices would stay with them for a long time. Lena's eyes met his, and for a moment, they were silent, just two survivors in a war-torn world. "We did it," she whispered. Alex nodded, but there was no smile on his face. "We did," he agreed, his voice low. "But it's not over. There's still a lot of work to do. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from over. The Syrian might have been defeated, but their influence was widespread. The galaxy would need time to heal, to rebuild. Humanity would need to come together, stronger than ever before, to ensure that this victory wasn't in vain." As Alex and Lena stood there, watching the remnants of the Syrian fleet fall from the sky, a sense of quiet determination filled the air. They had fought for something bigger than themselves. They had fought for the future. There was hope now, a glimmer of light in the darkness, and for the first time in a long time, Alex believed that humanity could rise from the ashes and rebuild. They had faced the impossible and survived. The future was uncertain, but they would face it together.